Blackhawks get blown out on national TV once again, but could help be on the way from the Canucks.
You're Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, Blackhawks fans? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Jack Bushman. Do me a quick favor. Please make sure to go and hit that like button. Jump in the comments section down below as well. And a quick note that I will be postponing Mailbag Monday until an episode later on this week, or maybe even next Monday, just because there's so much going down as the Blackhawks are closing in on the midway point of the season. I'm going to be dropping my Blackhawks mid-season prospect rankings later on this week, as well as going over Blackhawks Deep Dive 4.0. I'll also be dishing out mid-season grades for each and every Blackhawks player, so it's a really busy week. Got a lot to get to on today's episode as well, so I do apologize for pushing back Mailbag Monday. However, does allow anyone out there who has a Blackhawks-related question to either drop that in the comment section or hit me up on any one of my social media channels. I'll make sure to bookmark those and answer them whenever I do get to Mailbag Monday. Subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube as well if you haven't done so already. Really appreciate all the support here as of late, even though it's been some dire times for our Chicago Blackhawks. I'm super close to reaching my goal of 2,000 subscribers. Even if you're someone who regularly listens on an audio platform, please jump over to YouTube and hit that subscribe button for me. And last but certainly not least, one final shout out to today's sponsor, which is FanDuel. Go and check out FanDuel.com to win $200 worth of bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins with America's #1 sportsbook. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Again, thank you all for joining me on another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, your one-stop shop for all things Chicago Blackhawks. That New Year's vibe, sadly, along with that better effort promise out of Blackhawks captain Nick Foligno, didn't last very long, as after a nice start to 2025 with a 4-2 win over the Montreal Canadiens, the Blackhawks reverted back to their old ways in an original six matchup with the New York Rangers on Sunday afternoon. Yet another embarrassing performance on national television. Gotta love that. 6-2 final in favor of the Rangers, a team that also had been down in the dumps pretty bad here as of late, so much so that there were even rumors going into this matchup that if the Rangers had lost to the Blackhawks, it potentially could have been the last game for Rangers head coach Peter Laviolette. Hawks have now been blown out in 4 of their last 5 games. Each of their last 4 losses have been blowouts. Aside from that 4-2 win in the Dock Bowl last Thursday, here's the Blackhawks' other previous 4 games. They lost 6-2 to the Buffalo Sabres, which I'm sure some of you remember, as I talked about in my preview episode of that matchup. That was a Sabres team that was also down pretty bad at the time, and I thought it was an opportunity for the Blackhawks to right the ship. Nope, they got stomped 6-2 in embarrassing fashion. Then they went on to lose 5-1 to the Dallas Stars. Okay, one of the better teams in the Central Division with a really good and deep group, good mix of veterans and young players. That's, okay, an understandable loss. But then for them to fall 6-2 the way that they did at the Winter Classic on New Year's Eve to the St. Louis Blues, a team that's kind of had its ups and downs and is outside of the playoff picture at this point in time, and then falling the way that they did 6-2 yesterday afternoon to the New York Rangers, a team that's been on a schneid of their own. It has been very, very troubling times for the Chicago Blackhawks. Not only do they have 4 blowout losses in their last 5 games, but after winning 3 games in a row at the start of Andrew Sorensen's tenure as interim head coach, they've now dropped 8 of their last 12 and sit 13-25-2 through 40 games. Still good for dead last in the entire NHL. Not really going to dive into the what went wrongs for the Blackhawks in this game, because there was a lot that went wrong for them in the final 40 minutes. They had a decent first period, as they always seem to do, scored first for the 25th time in 40 games, but it doesn't really seem to matter whether it's Luke Richardson or Andrew Sorensen coaching this team. It's just a bad team at this point in time, and the real issue is there's just no consistency from a small vantage point, right, from shift to shift. I mean, how many times have we seen after the Blackhawks score a goal, they allow the opponent to go out there and get that goal right back, or After allowing a goal within a minute or two, they give up another one and just kind of allow that snowball effect. In the micro view, they have no consistency. From period to period, they have no consistency. And even from the macro view, game to game, there's no consistency whatsoever. And really frustrating, makes you want to rip your hair out. And the tough part is, I do feel like from some of the veterans, like a guy like Nick Foligno, who's trying to be the captain, a good leader, do the right things out there on the ice, I do think he plays the right way in the right style, but that's not happening from all the veterans. It's not happening from all the young guys. And it just feels like maybe there isn't that right type of ringleader in the locker room as the head coach. Whether it was Richardson or Sorensen, it was pretty clear there just wasn't the right guy to kind of solve these issues. And the Blackhawks also just don't have enough in their locker room in terms of guys on the ice to solve these issues either. And it's a real problem, and no surprise they're dead last in the NHL. On the bright side, we're not going to talk about all negatives here in segment one. Do want to give a shout out to Connor Bedard and Tyler Bertuzzi for continuing to click with one another. Bedard extended his point streak to a career-long point streak, I should say, to 7 games with a nice primary assist to set up Tyler Bertuzzi with the opening goal. Not only did we see the heads-up playmaking skill of Connor Bedard on that play, but also a nice play as well to force a turnover from a Rangers player. Poor back check as well there by Mika Zibanejad kind of allowed the Blackhawks to get off that high dangerous opportunity. But Tyler Bertuzzi, it's clear he's found his groove, and he also knows how to play with Connor Bedard. And that's why, to me, despite this great success that they've had, which has also kind of been brushed to the side by the lack of team success and all these lopsided losses, I love seeing Bedard and Bertuzzi have success with one another. Why in the heck did it take 30 to 35 games to play them with one another? I talked about this all offseason. The reason, and all throughout the early part of the season, when the coaching staff was reluctant to play them with one another, like literally ever, and I didn't understand it. Bringing in Tyler Bertuzzi, signing him in free agency, it only made sense for him to play with Connor Bedard, and you wasted more than a quarter of the season with them not playing on the same line. And look what happens when they do unite. Bertuzzi now has a team-leading 14 goals on the season with 6 tucks in his last 7 games. Connor Bedard has his career-long point streak. I love to see them having success, albeit not really leading to much team success, but it's frustrating just that even when things go right, it's like this should have been what was happening from the get-go. And for some reason, it wasn't even an option for the Blackhawks at the beginning of the season. Bertuzzi knows how to score goals in the dirty areas. He knows how to go to the crease. It took him a little longer to get going than we all would have wanted, but he's playing to his level right now, and Connor Bedard needed someone like that. And I don't think it's a surprise that he had a lot of success with Nick Foligno last year, who plays a little dieter version of what Tyler Bertuzzi brings to the table offensively. It only made sense. I don't know why it took 30 games. What I got to gripe about now after giving a shout out to Bedard and Bertuzzi is Lukas Reichel being scratched once again. And I know the Blackhawks were coming off of a 4-2 win, but for Reichel to now be scratched in back-to-back games after Colton Dach gets called up, and I know Colton Dach has looked solid and had a really sharp NHL debut. I mean, really, really solid, and plays that power forward style that the Blackhawks have truly been missing. But if you were planning to call him up at the detriment of Lukas Reichel, that just kind of seems like it's counterintuitive. And Reichel cannot be healthy scratched for a 3rd consecutive game. And I know that he's still trying to figure it out, but the thing that I keep coming back to, Blackhawks fans, is the speed that he has through the neutral zone. Yeah, there is a problem about what he can do with the puck when he enters the offensive zone, and the consistency there and the playmaking hasn't always been exquisite, but I don't think it also is helped by the fact that he's been playing with 4th liners like Tyler Bertuzzi in the first 25, 30, however many games it was with Connor Bedard. Lukas Reichel really hasn't been given an opportunity whatsoever inside the top 6. When he has, it's been for like a period or for a couple of shifts. And I've talked about how maybe Kyle Davidson doesn't want him to play that style because he doesn't project him as a top 6 type of guy. I still think the best thing for Lukas Reichel's development wouldn't be burying him on the 4th line for 10 minutes at a time and also healthy scratching him from the press box, when there are a lot more guys that deserve to be healthy scratched than Lukas Reichel, in my opinion. A guy on the 4th line who that's been one of the most consistent analytical lines for the Blackhawks all year, and he's been a part of their puck movement in the offensive zone. So Really frustrated that Lukas Reichel has been scratched and hasn't gotten a bigger look this year. Really frustrated that it took so long to get Connor Bedard an opportunity alongside Tyler Bertuzzi. And I'm a little frustrated, Blackhawks fans, that the Hawks didn't take a chance on Artur Kaliyev from the Los Angeles Kings, who was placed on waivers yesterday. Guy who went 33rd overall back in the 2019 NHL draft, 6'2", 210 pounds at 23 years of age, has been kind of stuck in a bottom six type of role for the Los Angeles Kings these last few years, as they've still been striving to make a run through the Stanley Cup playoffs. As a kind of impact, a side effect of that, a prospect like Kaliyev has kind of been left in the bottom six, where maybe that hasn't been the best for his development. And it feels like sending him to waivers, knowing that he was a 33rd overall selection, pretty good chance that someone was going to take a chance on him. I thought the Blackhawks, who dead last in the NHL standings, they have the number one overall waiver pick, even though it would make some roster conundrums and they'd have to make a decision on who they'd send to Rockford ultimately. I thought this would have been a free why not type of ad for bringing in Artur Kaliyev, someone who's known for his offensive abilities. Had 28 points in 56 games in the 2022-2023 campaign, takes a lot of one-timers, likes to shoot the puck, is decent at skating the puck out of the defensive zone as well. Not really a gifted skater, but is adequate defensively and has some offensive upside for someone who hasn't really gotten much of a chance with the Los Angeles Kings. And he's on a deal that expires at the end of this year as an RFA with arbitration rights, but only at $850,000. So it would have been there would have been no downside for the Blackhawks to add a player like Kaliyev, really, other than they would have had to figure out what to do with their roster situation. That would have been the only real downside. And I thought it would have been a clear uptick in offensive help in the bottom six, but ultimately Kyle Davidson elected to pass on that. The New York Rangers were the ones to claim Artur Kaliyev. And I've talked about how Blackhawks fans, Kyle Davidson will have the longer leash. You know, when Luke Richardson was still here, there were a lot of people calling for Davidson's job too. And I always made sure to reiterate that because it's such a long-term rebuild and because those high draft picks that Davidson drafted aren't really on the scene yet, it's only kind of Connor Bedard, right? You have to be patient, and Kyle Davidson is going to get a long leash because of that. And he has done a really good job, I think, in terms of his draft picks and taking advantage of the Blackhawks' financial situation and accumulating draft picks. However, I spoke about in the offseason, given Tyler Bertuzzi 4 years, given Teuvo Teravainen 3 years, given TJ Brodie 2 years. I didn't like any of those contracts. All three of those guys, even though Bert has been better, Teravainen's picked it up a little bit here as of late. Altogether, they've been pretty disappointing. In particular, Teuvo Teravainen and his consistency, and TJ Brodie. And also the Blackhawks in terms of not taking a step this year. They're still the worst team in the entire NHL. How Kyle Davidson has kind of gone about the NHL roster and just not stepping in. And I don't know if this is really a place of an NHL general manager, but just from afar, when it took so long to get Connor Bedard an opportunity with Tyler Bertuzzi, it just feels like it's a tough look for Kyle Davidson and his handling of the team. Like, we're all watching this. Someone's got to step in and say something. You got to give Lukas Reichel an opportunity. You got to give these young kids a chance. You got to give Tyler Bertuzzi a spot in where he was designed to come into this team and have success. There's a lot of things working against Kyle Davidson right here, right now, and I think that's becoming a little bit more clear this season because this was a year where we thought we were going to get a step out of the Blackhawks, and that hasn't been the case through their first 40 games. Still a lot to be determined whether or not general manager Kyle Davidson is going to be a good general manager, and I do have high hopes for them. Let me preface that. But in terms of his roster handling and his decision-making in free agency, it's been pretty clear that he's a first-time general manager because there have been some mistakes along the way as well, along with kind of some of the things that have been handled on the ice for the Blackhawks this year. And again, I know there's a head coach to handle those things for a reason, but this is still general manager Kyle Davidson's rebuild, and things have to kind of go a certain way. And I feel like there have just been unexplainable things that have been happening for the Blackhawks this year that even to me have been just so frustrating to see. It's been a tough stretch for the Chicago Blackhawks. Kyle Davidson, you know, we're going to remain patient with him. I want to preach that for Blackhawks fans, but if stuff like this continues to happen, a lot of fans are going to start pointing fingers towards him. Whether that's right or wrong, that's just going to be the situation. I will again say he's going to have a long leash, and the Blackhawks are going to ride him out for at least another couple of years because we got to see what, Connor Bedard truly becomes, what Kevin Korchinski truly becomes, Frank Nazar, Oliver Moore, Sasha Boisvert, Sam Renzel, right? These guys, most of them aren't even here. So we can't truly evaluate how good of a job Kyle Davidson has done yet until those guys come onto the scene. But there have been some first-time GM mistakes, that is for sure, and just the lack of solutions that this Blackhawks team has for them right here, right now, is even more frustrating and has put them in a real tough spot. There are my thoughts on the Blackhawks' fourth blowout loss in their last 5 games and kind of the bigger issues looming over that. Coming up in just a minute, though, Blackhawks fans, I'll talk about whether help could potentially be on the way, as there have been rumors that the Hawks should go after Vancouver Canucks forwards JT Miller and Elias Pettersson. But first, I do want to talk to you all real quick about the fine folks over at FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are on the horizon, but it's not too late to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can win $200 worth of bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. And the FanDuel now has so many ways for you to pick up a W. Personally, I love betting on which players will score a touchdown and also how many points will be scored. But FanDuel also has bets for player props, money line, game specials, and so much more. And to take advantage of this amazing offer, go and check out FanDuel.com to join today. Again, that's FanDuel.com for your chance to win $200 worth of bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. So make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the National Football League. Segment 2, I've already covered a slew of trade rumors surrounding the Blackhawks here this season with players of their own like, Andreas Athanasiou, Connor Murphy, players on other teams such as Patrick Laine, Trevor Zegras, Dylan Cousins, so on and so forth. Well, Vancouver Canucks forwards Elias Pettersson and JT Miller have both been mentioned among trade rumors here recently, as the Canucks are off to a little bit of a disappointing start as they're 18-12-8 through their opening 38 games. They are still currently in a playoff spot. They hold the final wild card playoff spot in the Western Conference at this point in time, but still not exactly where they expected to be. And there, of course, has been a reported rift between these two players over the last couple of weeks. There's kind of been some dodging going on in terms of answering them to the media, but there's been a lot of speculation about what's going to happen with the Canucks. Sounds like, they want to try and figure this problem out and they'd like to not trade one of these two guys, but ultimately one of them could be on the move because of this situation. For Elias Pettersson, first and foremost, he's obviously the bigger player or the higher profile player of the two here. He's had his name thrown around in trade rumors for the last couple of years. First burst onto the NHL scene with a massive rookie year in 2017 in which he tallied 66 points in 71 games, went on to tally 66 points in the next season as well. But after that, he had kind of 2 down years. That's when the trade rumors sparked up once again, but then put them to bed within a 102-point campaign. Followed that up with 89 points in 82 games last year for the Canucks. Through 34 games so far this year, the production has been down a little bit once again with 10 goals and 18 assists for 28 points. That's kind of led to trade talk sparking up once again, along with this reported rift. The problem with Elias Pettersson, I guess it's not really a problem, it's just a result of him being such a high-profile offensive-minded player, is that he's getting paid $11.6 million. He went on and signed that deal with Vancouver at the end of last season, following a, like I said, 89-point campaign. So he's getting paid $11.6 million through 2032. He is already 26 years of age. Doesn't have a full no movement clause on his contract as of yet, but that will officially kick in next season. So whoever would take on this contract, in theory, would have to keep in mind that they're acquiring an Elias Pettersson that will eventually have a no-movement clause. There have been a lot of inconsistencies in his game from even just season to season, right? And you haven't exactly been sure what you're going to get from him in the playoffs or on the defensive side of things. There's obviously the off-ice stuff that's going on right now. There's a lot of worries about Elias Pettersson, but when he's right, he is right, and he's one of the brightest young players in the NHL. I think he's truly on that superstar caliber, and those type of players don't just grow on trees. For JT Miller, obviously he's the older of the two players, but has been very productive for Vancouver over the last handful of seasons as their captain. 31 years old now, but has interestingly took a leave of absence from his team earlier on in the season, and the goal scoring just hasn't been there for him this year. He's only got 6 goals in 28 games, which is definitely noteworthy for a guy who's potted 30 in each of the last 3 years. And also, he's got 25 points in 28 games, but this is a guy who's potted at least 99 points in 2 of the last 3 seasons and is being paid a premium as well. $8 million for JT Miller through the end of 2030. He does have a full no movement clause, so that is something to consider with JT Miller. He would have to approve to be traded anywhere. Elias Pettersson would not. As far as whether the Chicago Blackhawks should have interest here, Elliot Friedman on his 32 Thoughts column said the Blackhawks should be all over this. As far as what the Canucks could possibly be looking for in return, from all the articles and from what I've read and what I've heard, sounds like their biggest priority is getting a center back. They also, though, have been in the mix the last couple of seasons to add another top 4 defenseman along with Quinn Hughes. Philip Roenick has kind of stepped up, but I think they'd still like to add another big-name defenseman to really feel confident in their blue line in terms of a Stanley Cup playoff run. So those are probably the 2 biggest adds that the Canucks have been wanting, and it does feel like, they're wanting to have a solution here. Like I said, they don't want to trade either of these guys. They'd like to avoid that, but they're not going to want to tear this down whatsoever. So the idea of first round pick or something, I feel like draft picks are kind of off the table here in terms of being the major breaking point of the deal. For Elias Pettersson, it's very, very complicated because of his $11.6 million price tag through 2032. I think the Canucks would be more hard-pressed to trade him. I also think there would be more teams that would be hard-pressed to take on that salary. There's just not a lot of teams in the NHL that actually can afford that. The Chicago Blackhawks, though, would be one of them. The question the Chicago Blackhawks would have to ask themselves, if Elias Pettersson is legitimately on the market and they would want to make a move for him, is would they rather have him, or do they think they can make a run at someone like a Mikko Rantanen or a Mitch Marner here in the offseason? That's kind of something they have to weigh. And do they like Marner better than Pettersson? Do they like Rantanen better than Pettersson? I'm sure they do, but what's the likelihood of all those happening, and each one of those situations happening on their own as well? That's something that the Blackhawks would have to weigh here. Then you also have to wonder what the Blackhawks would have to give up in order to get someone like Elias Pettersson. As I mentioned, they've been wanting to get a big-name center back. I don't know if the Blackhawks necessarily have that big-name center that would attract the Vancouver Canucks enough, other than Connor Bedard, and he's obviously not on the table. So I feel like the big piece in an Elias Pettersson trade would have to be the defenseman. And to me, moving $11.6 million, it would only make sense for the Blackhawks to move another big contract as well, a la Seth Jones. I think Seth Jones would have to be the big piece for the Blackhawks, but obviously Elias Pettersson is the better player. So the Blackhawks would have to throw in more, and I think the Canucks would probably want a center. Who in the Blackhawks pipeline do they value the highest? Who's the best center between Frank Nazar, Oliver Moore, and Sasha Boisvert? I think it's a very interesting question. I'd probably go Frank Nazar right here, right now, but there are obviously those unknowns still about Oliver Moore and Sasha Boisvert. Probably one of those has to go as well. I think it's probably more Boisvert that would wind up having to go along with Seth Jones. And even then, I don't know if that would be enough. Boisvert and Seth Jones for Elias Pettersson, that feels probably equal. Maybe the Blackhawks have to throw around a 3rd-round pick, but there's a lot of complications there. Seth Jones also would have to waive his no-movement clause to go to the Vancouver Canucks. So there's a lot of complications there, but I do think Elias Pettersson, he's very interesting, man. And like I said, when he's right, he's a superstar in this league, and the Blackhawks would obviously have to be the highest bidders on the free agent market for a Mitch Marner or a Mikko Rantanen. Who knows what those price tags are? You know what the price tag is with Elias Pettersson. So there's pros, there's cons, there's difficulties in an Elias Pettersson trade. I would say that's probably the more unlikely of the two to happen. I think JT Miller doesn't really make a lot of sense for the Blackhawks in particular because of his contract. but I do think he is the more likely player to be traded from the Canucks if that were to make sense. JT Miller, as I mentioned, 31 years old, captain, good leader, has been unbelievable on the ice these last few seasons for Vancouver as a true top-line center, right? The Blackhawks obviously would love to have an 100-point top-line center, whether it is Pettersson or JT Miller coming in. JT Miller, though, would have to waive his no-movement clause to go to Chicago. Would JT Miller want to waive his no-movement clause to go to Chicago? I don't know if he would want to be doing that. And also, would the Blackhawks want to pay him $8 million through 2030 when they're a rebuilding squad? Yes, he is a legitimate center that could help this offense right here, right now. But that's a lot of money to commit for a long time to JT Miller, who's already over 30 years old. And this is a team in a rebuild that's going to want to be spending that type of money on guys they know that are going to be part of the solution. So that's why I have some concerns about the Blackhawks' likelihood of actually trading for JT Miller. But I do think in terms of if the Canucks were to trade Pettersson or Miller, which one of the two is more likely to get moved? I think it is JT Miller. Just mustering up a hypothetical Blackhawks deal for JT Miller here. I do think also this would probably have to be a Seth Jones or Connor Murphy type of focal point trade, just because the Blackhawks don't have an NHL centerman on their roster other than Connor Bedard that's going to intrigue the Vancouver Canucks enough. So it would probably still have to be Seth Jones and or Connor Murphy. We know the Blackhawks aren't going to be trading Alex Vlasic. Seth Jones and Connor Murphy, Seth Jones / Connor Murphy, one of those two, along with probably still like I don't know, Marek Vanacker, Nick Lardis, maybe even someone like an Oliver Moore, Sasha Boisvert. It would probably still take a decent type of prospect in order for the Vancouver Canucks to make this trade. Because at the end of the day, they don't really have to make this deal, even though there's some rumblings in the locker room. It feels like something has to give. They don't ultimately have to trade these guys at the end of the day. If they feel like they do, though, that's where a team like the Blackhawks with some financial wiggle room could have some leverage. Really interesting. This was another trade I forgot to bring up that I drew up about Elias Pettersson. I got two of them actually. I'm glad I remembered these. And I don't know if I'd make these. These are just hypotheticals that I threw out there. And you got to remember when you're getting a player like Elias Pettersson, you got to give something to get something, even if it is a situation like this for the Vancouver Canucks. If you were the Blackhawks, and I wouldn't, but if you were the Blackhawks, would you trade Alex Vlasic for Elias Pettersson 1-for-1? Pettersson's 26, Vlasic's 23. Yeah, Vlasic looks like he's going to develop into a number one defenseman in this league. But the Blackhawks, I mean, they have some lacking forward prospects in terms of guys who you know are going to be game breakers. And we know, again, when Elias Pettersson is right, he's a game breaker. And on the back end, you've been happy with Kevin Korchinski's development. Wyatt Kaiser's taken a nice step. You still have Artem Levshinov. You still have Sam Renzel. You still have all of these draft picks. Would you risk trading someone like Alex Vlasic for Elias Pettersson? I personally wouldn't, but I think that would be like, if Kyle Davidson got that trade, that would be really interesting to see what would go down. And I'm sure there's probably some people out there that would say, yeah, you trade Alex Vlasic for Elias Pettersson, but just because we've seen him grow here in Chicago, I think we're a little bit harder pressed to get rid of a player like him. I also drew up Kevin Korchinski and Nick Lardis in a second for Elias Pettersson. I don't really think that's ultimately going to be enough to move the needle for Vancouver. I think it's a low likelihood the Blackhawks ultimately wind up with either of these guys. Elias Pettersson is certainly the more intriguing prospect, but there's a lot that goes into it, and the Blackhawks would likely have to get rid of Seth Jones. Would he waive his no-movement clause to go to Vancouver? I don't know. Possibly. We'll see what winds up happening there. Always fun to talk about trade rumors. Always fun to kind of drum up mock trades. And if you have a mock trade, if you're watching this right now, if you have a mock trade for the Blackhawks for Elias Pettersson or for JT Miller, go and drop them in the comment section down below right now. I don't ever claim to be like the master at drawing up mock trades. I just kind of try to take a look at everything and project the likelihoods of deals. There's complications in each of these. I'm not going to say it's completely off the table. I'm not going to say it's the most likely thing in the world either, though. There are my thoughts on the Blackhawks potentially making a move for JT Miller or Elias Pettersson. There's been some rumors in the news as of late. Coming up in just a moment, before I wrap up today's episode, I still got to talk about Oliver Moore going back-to-back for gold at the World Juniors. Real quick though, Blackhawks fans, I got to talk to you all about Rocket Money. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions that you forgot about or that you were paying for twice? That definitely happened to me. I had a few subscriptions that I didn't even realize I was still paying for, and Rocket Money made it so easy to track them all down in a hurry. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so that you can grow your savings. And Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million worth of canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. So go and cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. Again, that's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Back here on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you all again to everyone for making Locked On Blackhawks your very first listen, here to start off your week and to kick off 2025. Happy New Year to everyone watching and tuning in. For your second listen, make sure to go and check out the Locked On Fantasy Hockey podcast so that you can become a fantasy hockey expert and get the edge over your league mates with daily tips from Steal and Flip. You can easily find the link to Locked On Fantasy Hockey on YouTube or wherever you may listen to your podcasts. Segment 3, for the first time in the history of the World Junior Championship, the United States of America has gone back-to-back as gold medalist. Congratulations, of course, to now two-time U20 World Junior gold medalist Oliver Moore. Big part of the United States' success, winds up finishing the tournament with 5 points, 1 goal, and 4 assists in 7 games played. I would say my biggest takeaway in watching Oliver Moore, really didn't learn anything particularly new about Oliver Moore because I already knew it was all about speed when we're talking about this kid. It was on full display whenever the United States was on the ice. Oliver Moore and his wheels, it's the name of his game. It's the biggest weapon, and he uses it to make an impact in so many different areas, whether it's, making a stride on the defensive side of things. He always makes a good effort in the 200-foot game, whether it's on the penalty kill or along the boards on the offensive zone cycle to use his edges to change direction, or whether he gets up on the rush and makes a heads-up read. Like, he uses his wheels in every area of the ice to make an impact. Like I said, defensively, offensively, when he has the puck, he makes heads-up reads at a high speed. Speed kills. It's the name of the game in the NHL, and Oliver Moore absolutely has it. He's one of the best skaters that I've ever seen. That's always going to be his bread and butter. The playmaking, I thought, was pretty nice throughout the tournament. The biggest knocks on him, I would say, are 1, the goal scoring, and 2, just the finished product and kind of staying within himself. It's almost like, and this was kind of something that was talked about with Oliver Moore when he was first drafted, and even what we were seeing from him when he first got onto the college scene with Minnesota. He was almost too fast for his own hands. The Andreas Athanasiou syndrome, as we should call it. That was kind of the knack on Oliver Moore. He was too fast for his hands. He's kind of caught up here over the last year and a half. He's gotten better at that. I think it is still noticeable, though, especially when he's playing in a best-on-best tournament like the World Junior Championship. Getting the finished product, goal scoring, and consistency with the puck on his stick are kind of the 3 biggest knocks. And I do wonder exactly what type of offensive player Oliver Moore is going to be at the next level. I think there's still a lot up in the air, and it's also going to be determined by whether or not he's going to play center or whether he's going to play the wing. I think you probably let him play center because I just think he's going to be such a good defensive player. I think he's going to be a solid playmaker and probably like a 50 to 60 offensive point guy, more so with his assist numbers because of his speed and the recognition that he has out there as opposed to the goal scoring. But I really feel like he's just going to be one of those glue guys that's going to help make a good team great. And it's not a surprise that, Oliver Moore's played at high-level programs everywhere he's been, but he's also a winner. Everywhere he's been, his team has had success as well. And I think just the style of play that he plays with, he reminds me of a forward Zeev Buium. I just had that comparison in my head. Like, Zeev Buium isn't going to be the biggest game-changer offensive defenseman at the next level, and I've compared him to Devon Taves in terms of the NHL player that I see him drawing comparisons to. I feel like Oliver Moore is going to be the Zeev Buium of the forward group, right? Like, he's never going to be a high profile, like over point per game type of guy, but he's going to make an impact and he's going to help your team win. That's the type of player I think Oliver Moore is going to be. I love his speed. It's going to give him so much upside and so much potential. Whatever type of role he kind of slides into at the NHL level, I think he's going to be able to adapt to that because he has those wheels. I feel like he can be almost like a Brandon Hagel type of player with a little less offensive upside, or, maybe if Oliver Moore was playing with Nikita Kucherov, he'd be putting up 70, 80 points a year as well. I feel like that's the type of player that Oliver Moore is going to be. But congratulations to the red, white, and blue for going back-to-back. Oliver Moore for picking up his second gold medal at the U20 World Championships, defeating Finland in an epic overtime game. Yuri Felchman, by the way, in Czechia, wound up winning the bronze medal for a second consecutive year. Felchman, of course, third-round pick for the Blackhawks back in 2023. He did have a real good opportunity to kick off the tournament, centering Czechia's top line along with captain Eduard Šale, but unfortunately didn't have his best tournament. I thought he was okay. There's not really a ton of wheels there. He's got good size, 6'3", 200 pounds. Maybe some power forward mold in there. I don't know. I don't really know if I ever see Yuri Felchman being an NHLer, but still a couple of years of development, obviously, before we kind of have to make that determination for good. But yeah, he had one good opportunity to kick off the tournament on the top line, but with only 2 assists through 7 games, he wound up getting demoted. But congratulations to him and Czechia for winning bronze for a second consecutive year. I know that's probably got a ton of fans back in Czechia super pumped up. As far as my big World Juniors takeaways that I wanted to get to, other than the 2 Blackhawks prospects that took part, one, to me, James Higgins, I know there have been he's been a point per game type of guy in college hockey. The goal scoring hasn't really been there. Didn't have the type of season like Macklin Celebrini necessarily had the year before with Boston College. I still think with what James Higgins showed in this tournament, he should be the number 1 overall pick. He was the top line center for the United States throughout the tournament, had 9 points in 7 games, answered I thought, some of the goal scoring critiques that were being thrown his direction with 5 goals in 7 games. And that line was really leaned on by head coach David Carl, who I'll get to here in just a second, throughout the tournament. And he's, like I said, still been a point per game guy at the college level, which for the other 3 guys who are in conversation for the number 1 overall pick, they're not playing against grown men like James Higgins is. Higgins had the best tournament of any WJC prospect that was in it. I think James Higgins, I've been saying it for a while. I always have kind of knew he's going to be the number 1 overall pick. I think this tournament kind of set it in stone, but obviously still a lot can change before the draft. That's just my opinion. Second takeaway that I got from the World Juniors is USA Hockey, baby. It is here. First time ever, the United States goes back-to-back to win the gold medal. Canada, back-to-back years, they don't make the medal rounds. I've been saying it in my World Juniors previews when I've been going through my updates, but it feels like a changing of the tides in that USA Hockey, hey, I don't know if we're necessarily the big dogs over Canada, but we're right there neck and neck. It is not a pure Canadian sport any longer, and it's been awesome to see as an American. I'm sure there are Canadians who don't necessarily love that, but just to see how far the game has grown in the last 10, 15 years has been unbelievable, and I'm looking forward to a lot of good battles between the United States and Canada at the World Juniors for a long, long time. Third takeaway, Cole Hudson, the North Barrington, Illinois native who got drafted in the second round by the Washington Capitals. The kid is special. Heck of a game-tying goal in the second period last night to even it up. 11 points in 7 tournament games, 3 goals and 8 assists. I know he's undersized like his brother is, but the shiftiness, the playmaking, the offensive IQ, the swagger, the puck handling, it was all on display for Cole Hudson in this tournament. Fourth and final takeaway, David Carl just keeps making a name for himself at a young age. At just 35 years of age, he now is a 2-time U20 World Junior gold medalist as the head coach. He's also won 2 national championships with Denver University. He also has made 3 appearances in the Frozen Four and has an 148-62-16 record as Denver's head coach. I've talked about a little bit. I'll have a greater dive into David Carl, potentially as the next Blackhawks head coach in a bigger episode where he'll be the main talking point. But he continues. to get on folks' radar, and someone ultimately is going to give him an NHL job. The Blackhawks, there are a lot of reasons to be intrigued, obviously. I just do wonder if they have concerns about hiring a first-time NHL head coach for the third consecutive hire. However, David Carl's resume is a whole lot different than the two previous guys they hired. So we'll see what winds up happening there, but just another gold medal for David Carl, another reason for NHL teams to be looking his direction. Heck of a World Juniors. Always fun to sit back around Christmas and New Year's time to watch this tournament. I predicted that the United States was going to win for a second consecutive year. I said they had the deepest and the best roster, a lot of returning guys, best goaltending as well. I did have them beating Sweden, who got upset by Finland, obviously, in the semifinals, but did have the United States winning this year. I had the United States winning last year. Been a nice run for your boy and the US of A at the World Juniors. That's going to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Blackhawks. As always, thank you all again for joining me on the show. Be sure to go and follow Locked On Blackhawks for free right now, wherever you may be listening to your podcast, and to subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube. That way, you can get the latest episode as soon as it becomes available each and every day. As always, I'm your host, Jack Bushman. Check me out on X at Jack Bushman2. You can find my Strictly Blackhawks account, though, at Talkin' Hockey, for all the latest Blackhawks news and updates. So until the next episode, everyone, have a great rest of your day. I'll see you next time on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.